inside our minds is beautiful and vibrant. We're not the problem. No! Society is, so throw our own party. You're only invited if brain diversity is something you find exciting. 3 cheers to neurodivergency. Raise your cups. Hey! Positivity is non-toxic, so drink up. Here at the Rainbow Connection. Rainbow Connection.
Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to another episode of Rainbow Connection, the podcast where we celebrate neurodiversity and explore the colorful tapestry of the human mind. I'm your host, Andrea, and I am so thrilled to have you here with me today. We are diving into a topic that is personal to me, but also probably pretty personal to you, and that is mental health and neurodivergence. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart because, well, I've lived it, and I bet you have too. But more than that, it's a conversation that needs to happen. It's about breaking down barriers, smashing stigma, and fostering understanding and empathy for ourselves and others. So why talk about mental health and neurodivergence? For starters, because it's essential, because our mental health matters, because our neurodivergent brains are beautiful, complex, and worthy of celebration. But it's also because there's still so much work to be done. There are still so many misconceptions, too many barriers, and too many voices that are being silenced or ignored. But here's the thing. I believe in the power of conversation. I believe in the power of sharing our stories, our struggles, and our triumphs, because when we shine a light on the things that make us different, we give other people permission to do the same. We create space for healing, for growth, and for change. So, in today's episode, we're going to be diving deep into the intersection of mental health and neurodivergence. We're going to share stories, explore facts, and offer practical strategies for navigating this complex terrain, because together we can create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for who they are. So grab your favorite beverage, cozy up in your favorite spot, and let's dive in. This is going to be a chunky episode, so get comfy. First, I want to talk about the history of neurodiversity, which we kind of already did in the trailer episode. So if you haven't heard that, that might be a good one to listen to. But I'll give you a little bit of background just in case. The word itself has kind of some conflicting roots. There are a lot of different sources online that say that certain people coined this phrase, and I couldn't tell you which one was true because they all say different things. But the sources that I looked at for today's episode said that the word was first used by an autism rights advocate named Judy Singer and a New York journalist, Harvey Bloom. And they used it to kind of talk about the needs of people with autism who did not want to be defined by a disability label, but they wanted to be seen as neurologically different. And so disability and neurodivergence are very, they've got a messy relationship, and we're going to talk about that in today's episode as well. But the thing about neurodiversity and mental health and disability and all of these things is that there is no standard definition for what a normal brain is. Like, that's not a thing, because every brain, even quote unquote neurotypical brains, people who don't have neurodivergence, they're all different. There's no one way to be a human. And that makes it really fucking hard to figure out if a person, may have, symptoms of autism, they may have ADHD, they may have all these different things, including, in mental health. Like, is somebody depressed, or are they just sad because something happened? It's really complicated to diagnose these things because there's no standard definition. Now, of course, psychiatrists have their manuals that have, different criteria for what someone has to display to be considered a certain, to have a certain disorder. But even within the medical field, there is tons of uncertainty when it comes to neurodivergent disorders like autism, dyslexia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, intellectual disabilities, and even emotional and behavioral disorders. There's a lot of disagreement in the medical field itself. There's an established book that they use, but not every doctor agrees with that book. Not every doctor interprets the book the same way. So yeah, it's a sticky situation, which leaves us the neurodivergent in a weird place. But the one thing that all of the research I did agreed upon is that neurodivergent people got some strengths, yo. Like, we have some skills that our neurotypical friends don't necessarily have in the same way. And so I wanted to talk through some of those because, especially if you're struggling right now, if you're in a season of struggle, it can be hard to feel like you have value and that your symptoms that may be making your life harder actually have value. So let's talk about those. So I'm going to start, this list is unintentionally alphabetized, but people on the autism spectrum, people with autism spectrum disorder, they are a lot of times, not everybody, but a lot of times, really good at working with systems. So computer languages, mathematical systems, and machines, they're really good with tiny details and complex patterns, which I'm sure if you know somebody who is on the spectrum or if you yourself are on the spectrum, this probably resonates with you because I feel like even in popular media, they show autistic people, being really kind of focused on little details, kind of maybe almost even a little like anal retentive, that can be a pain in the butt sometimes, but it can also be really freaking good because, like, for example, me, I am not good with like little tiny details. I am not detail oriented at all because my brain's moving too fast and I can't sit still long enough to focus on the tiny details, but somebody with autism can. They see patterns, and that is so awesome. And people on the autism spectrum disorder are often targeted for occupations that include like writing computer manuals, managing databases, and debugging computer code. Society has identified a place for autistic individuals, which is kind of awesome. But if you don't resonate with that description of what it's like to be autistic, or if you don't want to be a computer coder or a, different, like a mathematician, if you don't want to do those things, that's also fine because there's no one way to be autistic, just like there's no one way to be human. So dyslexic folks, this one is for you. A lot of times dyslexic folks have really good visual spatial abilities, and these skills can be really good for like 3D thinking, like thinking in 3D. And that's good for things like astrophysics, molecular biology, genetics, engineering, and computer graphics. I would be crap at most of those things. But like people who struggle with dyslexia, they have skills in other areas that are bomb AF. So I learned about some new disorders and syndromes that I didn't know about. So Williams syndrome is a genetic disorder that comes with some developmental delays. It's considered an intellectual disability, but people with Williams syndrome oftentimes are really freaking good at music. That's beautiful. Down syndrome folks are warm and friendly. And I mean, obviously everybody has different personalities. Not every person with Down syndrome is nice and friendly and warm and loving. But I think, at least in my experience, a lot of the people with Down syndrome that I've met are just like such good fucking people. And that is a strength, where other people might see a weakness. People might see somebody with Down syndrome and say, oh, this is a disability. On the flip side, there are so many strengths that come from this. Prader-Willi syndrome is a rare genetic condition that affects your physical and mental and behavioral systems. It can come with a constant sense of hunger, leading to chronic overeating. But the people with Prader-Willi syndrome are oftentimes found to be really nurturing. And then ADHD, this is mine. This is my one. People with ADHD are really fucking creative a lot of the times, and they seek novelty. Like that is part of the disorder, is that we're constantly looking for something new and exciting. And that can be really great in developing new products, problem solving, that kind of thing. And I've got a little quote from the article that I read, but the key symptoms of ADHD, including hyperactivity, distractibility, and impulsivity, would have been adaptive traits in hunting and gathering societies in which people were, I'm going to skip this part because it's like medical lingo, but when ancient people were searching for food, they needed to be quick in their response to over environmental stimuli and quick in moving towards or away from any prey. So the fact that our brains are like hyper vigilant and super reactive would have been helpful in caveman times because we would have been hyper alert and hyper impulsive to move away from threats. So even like ADHD, can be super valuable in the world, and it has an evolutionary benefit. All of these disorders would not exist. We would have continued to evolve and move away from these quote unquote disorders if they didn't have a benefit, okay? Because survival of the fittest, right? And if survival of the fittest meant only white men, then we'd only have white men. And granted, we do have a lot of white men in the world, but there are a lot of other types of people too. And there is a reason those types of people are around, because there is a benefit evolutionarily to them, right? Because we're not talking there's just like one autistic guy somewhere hanging out somewhere by himself and his family protects him. No, there are so many people who are neurodiverse, and they wouldn't be here on this planet surviving, and in some cases thriving, if they weren't supposed to be here, right? Okay, I want to talk about neurodivergence as a disability for a second, because there's a lot of disagreement in the research about this as well. You know, some people consider neurodivergence a disability. Some people do not. I'm going to tell you the stance that this podcast takes, but you have to decide for yourself. So, personally, based on the research I've done, I believe that neurodivergent people are sometimes disabled, but neurodivergence is not in and of itself a disability, right? So there's this thing called the social model of disability, and that says that disability is a result of a poor fit between a person and their surroundings. So a person who is not able to walk, a building that only has stairs is not a good fit for that person. The problem isn't the person, the problem is the environment. So that is the social model of disability. So it's kind of saying that, you know, people with neurodivergence do not have the problem. The problem is that society is not set up for them, which is exactly what this podcast is about, right? So in other words, disability results not from neurodivergence itself, but from living in a society which tends to be physically, socially, and emotionally inhospitable towards neurodivergent people. So the world doesn't play nice with neurodivergence, and therefore neurodivergent people have a hard time. It's not because there's anything wrong with being neurodivergent, it's because the world isn't set up for us. So that is the school of thought that this podcast subscribes to. If you as a neurodivergent person also identify as a disabled person, that's fine. That's you. That's your decision. Obviously, there are laws and, government, regulations that also seek to define what it means to be a disabled individual. Obviously, ADHD isn't probably going to get you government benefits for being disabled, but there are laws and whatnot that protect people with neurodivergence because it is considered a disability in some capacities. Now, I want to tell you what neurodiversity isn't. And I actually got this question from a coworker recently. They asked me, is depression neurodivergence? Is mental health like a type of neurodivergence? And I'm going to be honest, when she asked that, I didn't actually know how to respond. I gave my best answer, but it turns out I was right. So yeah, neurodiversity is not a mental health disorder. It's not the same thing. And I can't tell you the chemistry of why it's not the same thing, but I will tell you that neurodiversity is not the same as mental health. Neurodiverse people have a higher rate of mental health struggles, but that's because, again, how we talked about before, society's not set up for them. They have a higher rate of mental health struggles because of the way they're treated, because of the stigmas associated with being neurodiverse or having a disability, because of the way people treat them. So being neurodiverse doesn't necessarily equate to having poor mental health, but there are a lot of extra risks because neurodiverse people have to exist in a world that wasn't made for them. So people with dyslexia oftentimes feel low self-esteem because people think they're stupid, which is not true, even a little bit. But, they struggle with certain tasks that other people find easy, which can make them feel bad. And especially if other people join in to make them feel bad, people with dyslexia can, have poor self-esteem issues because of that. People with dyspraxia, that is a disorder that comes with coordination and motor skill struggles. People with dyspraxia are more likely to have ADHD or autism autism spectrum disorder. And they tend to be, unfortunately, like really common targets for jokes and bullying because the way they move is different, which is really visible. And, it makes them an easy target for bullying because people see their disability, their disorder on the outside, and they, can comment on it. ADHD, I can attest to this one. People with ADHD can oftentimes feel out of control and overwhelmed, which those two words are like my life in a nutshell. And in extreme cases, people with ADHD can hate themselves. And I know I felt this. I have hated myself before because of things that happened to me because of my ADHD. But 3 out of 10 children with ADHD also have an anxiety disorder. So I remember when I was first diagnosed as a child with ADHD, but later when I kind of circled back with a doctor in my adult life and I said, hey, I had ADHD as a kid. I think I still do. What can we do? My doctor said to me, well, ADHD can sometimes cause depression symptoms, and depression can cause ADHD-like symptoms. So let's start with one and we'll see if it helps the other. So we decided to treat my ADHD symptoms to see if it would help my depression symptoms. So that's another thing that's so crazy. You can have ADHD symptoms without having ADHD. If you're going through a depressive episode or you have a depressive disorder or you're just, you're feeling depressed, those can cause symptoms that are like ADHD, not being able to focus, fidgeting, not being able to sit still, stuff like that. So that's why it's so freaking hard to diagnose some of these because so many of them overlap, so many of them commingle. There are some things that are common amongst neurodivergent people. And I'm going to talk about 2 different actions that neurodiverse people do that may resonate with you. So neurodiverse people oftentimes will do something called masking and they'll do something called stimming. Now, the interesting thing about this is that everybody does these 2 things. Everybody, even if you're neurotypical and don't identify as neurodivergent in any way, I guarantee you've done these 2 things. But neurodivergent people do them a lot more. Masking is when someone kind of hides or conceals their traits during social interactions. It's especially common for autistic people because, you want to quote unquote pass as quote unquote normal in social situations. So you may go to work, you may go to a friend's house, you may go out and you're pretending like you're not neurodivergent. And I mean, everybody does this. You go to work, you're having a bad day, you put on a happy face and you pretend like you're fine. But imagine if you had to do that every day. And that is why neurodivergent people have a higher rate of mental health struggles because we are constantly having to pretend like we're not neurodivergent because society has decided that it's a bad thing that you shouldn't be. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's not a bad thing, that it's not something you should try and hide unless you need to do so for your safety. Neurodivergence is just a way that the brain works. It's just a different way that the brain works. And I know that I have struggled my entire life with feeling inauthentic. I have struggled my entire life with wondering, who the heck am I? Because every time I go around other people, I have to pretend I'm a certain way. And that doesn't feel like me. So am I a liar? Am I a faker? Am I, what am I? And it took me years to realize that I was just trying to fit in, with society the way we all do. And there was nothing wrong with me. And I wasn't a fake person. I was just me. And I was doing the best I could with the information I had. And the information I had told me that I needed to pretend to be normal. But I knew in my heart that wasn't true. And I knew in my heart that I wasn't quote unquote normal, because what a terrible thing to be, right? Even normal people aren't normal. We're all so different. And if we just embrace that difference, I just think the world would be a better place. Anyway, that's enough of my little tangent. But so masking, it's something we all do, but it's something that neurodivergent people oftentimes feel the need to do a lot more. And the other thing is called stimming. And this one blew my mind because I was vaguely aware of stimming as it related to autistic individuals. And so stimming is a self-stimulatory behavior. So it can be repetitive movements or sounds. I know, especially in the media, we have a lot of images and video of, people on the autistic spectrum who may, flap their arms, or they may say a word over and over again, or they may, do something else repetitive. And it's a self-soothing behavior. It's a way to handle being over or understimulated. It's a way to handle emotions. And I realized that in doing my research, people with ADHD also do this. So, for example, at night when I am trying to fall asleep, I rock back and forth in bed. I am literally rocking myself to sleep. And that would be considered stimming, because it's a self-soothing behavior. And obviously people who I have shared a bed with in the past have commented on it and they're like, hey, that's weird. And that sucks. Like, no, it's not weird. I'm just rocking myself to sleep. That's fine. Like, it makes me feel good. It doesn't hurt anybody, and the same is true for people who may stim in social situations. People see a person doing these actions and think it's weird. But in reality, it's not hurting anybody. And it's just helping this person who has sensory sensitivities to feel better. So who the fuck cares? Like, stim to your heart's content. And you neurotypical people, you do this too. Think about the last time you were waiting for an interview, waiting for an important meeting, and maybe you tapped your foot because you were impatient and anxious. You tapped your foot or you just couldn't stop jiggling your knee. That's stimming, baby. We all do it. Neurodivergent people just do it more and get made fun of for it. So don't feel bad about doing what you have to do to feel good, because there is nothing wrong. As long as you're not hurting anybody, do what you need to do to feel good in this world, especially since this world wasn't made for you. Now, if you listened to the last episode, you know that I am a big, big fan of intersectionality. And for those of you who didn't listen to the last episode, or those of you who forgot, intersectionality just means that all of us are lots of different things. So I am neurodivergent, a specific type of neurodivergent. I have ADHD and some mental health diagnoses, and I'm a woman. And those things come with certain struggles. So we've got to look at everything holistically. People in the neurodivergent community are neurodiverse, but they also might have mental health struggles. People in the neurodiverse community may be in a marginalized community. They may be a person of color. They may be a member of the LGBTQ plus community. They may be a member of a different marginalized community. And with that comes its own struggles as well as mental health struggles, And then you combine being neurodivergent with being a member of a marginalized community with mental health struggles, which have their own stigma attached to them because we don't want to talk about mental health for some reason in this world. All of those things combine to make a truly unique experience. And so I just want you to remember that, for example, you may be neurodiverse and you may have a neurodiverse friend, but if your neurodiverse friend is also a person of color, they have even more stigma and struggles as part of their experience. And they have different relationships with mental health and how they deal with mental health and how their culture deals with mental health, right? So I just want everybody listening to this to remember that there is no one way to be neurodiverse. There's no one way to be a human, and we all experience things in very different ways. And all those ways are valid, but some of those ways are harder than others. And we need to be sensitive to that. So how do we deal with all of this shit that I just unpacked on you? I basically just spent a half an hour telling you that it's really hard to be neurodiverse. So what do we do about it? Well, first things first, I want to remind you, like I do every episode, you are not the problem. You're not the problem. I'm not the problem. It's okay to be neurodiverse, no matter what society tells you, no matter what your parents tell you, no matter what your friends tell you, no matter what the TV tells you. It's okay to be neurodiverse. It just means you're different, and different is beautiful. So that is absolutely number one. Do not think that you are the problem, because you're not. You need to advocate for yourself, because unfortunately, no one else is going to do it for you in a consistent and reliable way. You are your number one ally. So if you're able to, and I understand that it's not always safe, it's not always comfortable, but if you can do so without putting yourself in harm's way, advocate for yourself. Tell people what you need, because 9 times out of 10, if you just come to somebody with love and compassion in your heart and you say, hey, I really need to do X, Y, and Z. I feel like I've been masking with you and I'd like to stop doing that. and just be my authentic self? Would you be comfortable with that? If you come to people with honesty and just with the goal of living your life authentically and feeling good, 9 times out of 10, people are going to be receptive to that. They're going to be like, oh yeah, I had no idea you were masking. I had no idea that that thing that you do was stimming. That's so interesting. You know, they might be confused. They might not know what to say because it's new to them. But for the most part, people are going to respond positively. Now, that other 1%, 1 out of 10, some people just suck. And I don't know why. I don't know why people suck sometimes. Usually because they're going through something or something happened to them or they've got their own shit that they need to deal with. It's very rarely, I would say never, about you. So if you go to somebody and you tell them what you need and they're like, they write you off and they're like, psh, that's stupid. I'm not doing that. I don't care. That person's not for you. And that person might be a parent. That person might be a sibling. That person might be a best friend. That person might be your boss. And those people are not for you. And you may not be able to get away from that person. So I have 2 pieces of advice. First, don't give up. People evolve and change. Just because you told your parent that you need a certain accommodation or you believe you're autistic or you have ADHD or you're struggling with some sort of mental health struggle and they responded poorly, doesn't mean they'll always respond poorly. You know, they may just need time to adjust and process. But if they continue to respond poorly and you can't get away from them for whatever reason, I just want you to remember that it's not your fault. That even if people tell you there's something wrong with you, it's not true. It's not true. You are perfect the way you are. And you're supposed to be here on this world to do whatever it is that lights you up. And there are going to be people who tell you that you are wrong, that you are not enough, and that you're broken. And I'm here to tell you that those people don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Those people are scared and they've got their own shit to deal with, but that shit is not your shit. You are not the problem. So if you need more information on how to advocate for yourself at work or school, listen to the last episode because we talked about specific examples there. Another thing you can do is to just engage with people, especially if you can find people who are kind of like you, who get it. I just recently started a Discord server to go along with this podcast. So if you are interested in joining, go to AndreaWesterland.com and there's a link right there. I'll include a link in the show notes, but you can meet other neurodivergent people and talk about things that are important to you. Don't be scared to use tools that help your brain. So for me, I use AI a lot. I use AI to write my podcasts. I use AI to create social media content. I use AI to make my job easier, and it works for me. Your tools may be something totally different. If you're interested in AI, on my Instagram, I have a guide on how to use ChatGPT as a neurodivergent individual. Whatever works for you. Find tools that work for you and use them. And of course, there's always professional help. You know, if you don't have an official diagnosis yet, but you suspect that something may be going on, talk to a doctor. You know, some doctors suck, but some doctors are great. And for the most part, doctors want to help people. They just don't always know how to do it. So talk to somebody. Starting with your primary care physician is an easy place to start. But word from the wise, if you can only see your primary care physician because of insurance or money or, you know, transportation or whatever reason, that is good. That is good. But if it is within your power, see if you can meet with a specialist. See if you can meet with somebody who specializes either in mental health or neurodivergence, because those people are a lot more skilled at treating the symptoms of these disorders. And I know I have gotten treatment from primary care physicians that didn't feel like it was quite specialized enough, quite personalized enough. You know, you get to talk to your doctor for 20 minutes and then they hand you some pills and you go home. And sometimes we need more than that. So if you can, see if you can talk to somebody who specializes in mental health or who specializes in neurodivergence or both. Just to summarize what we talked about today, neurodivergence is not a mental health disorder, but lots of neurodiverse people struggle at a greater rate with mental health, oftentimes because of the way society treats them. This podcast does not consider neurodivergence a disability. But I do acknowledge that people with neurodivergence, neurodiverse people, can also have a disability. But I don't think they're the same thing. You have to make that decision on your own. Intersectionality plays a big part in mental health and neurodiversity. Just remember that we're all different and that none of our experiences are the same. And please don't forget to advocate for yourself. Ask for help. And remember, you are not the problem. This is a long-ass episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe on whatever podcast program you're listening on and share it. Screenshot it and share it to your Instagram stories and tag me because I would love that. That would make me happy. And it would also show people that this podcast is dope and they should listen to it. And if you know somebody in your life who could benefit from this knowledge, this information, share it. Of course, go to AndreaWesterlund.com for information on our free Discord server that you can join, as well as all my social media stuffs. And I want you to remember that I love you to bits and I am here for you, even if it feels like no one else is. So stay curious, stay colorful, and keep celebrating what makes you, you. Bye for now.
Positivity.